Welcome to the book reading of The Man Who Founded the ANC, a biography of Pixley Ka-Isaka Siema by Bongani Ngqulunga. We're going to go straight to the introduction. The death of Pixley Ka-Isaka Siema on Thursday morning, the 7th of July 1951, at his legal practice in central Johannesburg, came as a shock to black people in South Africa and neighboring territories. Although Siema was close to 70, his death took everybody by surprise, including his wife, Princess Pigisile, the eldest daughter of Dinizulu kaCetshwayo. When her husband died, she and their 3 children were not in Johannesburg. They had relocated to Mahashini in the Nongoma district of Natal, where she had built a home not far from the royal homestead of Cyprian Ka-Solomon, her nephew and the Zulu king at the time. The first she heard of her husband's illness was an urgent message that she should travel to Johannesburg immediately. By the time she arrived, Siema was dead. His body was already in a mortuary in Alexandra Township outside Johannesburg. Siema's death followed closely upon that of Sifaku Magatu just 2 weeks before, on the 23rd May 1951. Now, 4 of the first 5 African National Congress presidents were deceased. John Dube, Josiah Gumede, having died in 1946. Only Reverend Zacchaeus Mahabane remained, and he would live on until 1971, eventually passing away at the age of 90. Although Siema had by then abandoned active politics, the news of his death nevertheless evoked a deep sense of loss, resulting in impassioned eulogies in black newspapers. The Bantu world captured the dominant sentiments of the time. If today, Basutus, Zulus, Xhosas, Shanganis, Batswanas, and Vendors know themselves as Africans, and that Africa is the land of their father, they owe this to the inspiring foundation of African nationalism laid by Pixley Ka-Isaka Siema. Ilanga laseNatal echoed this in an editorial. The passing away of Dr. Siema removes from our midst one of the pioneers of African nationalism. Indeed, it might be said it brings to a close an important era in the political life of the African people. In a tribute to Don K. Ngubane, editor of Inkundla Yabantu, went so far as to suggest that Siema would go down in history as the greatest African of the first 50 years of the 20th century, if not the century as a whole. Siema was buried at Nuclear Cemetery in Johannesburg on the 17th of June 1951. The funeral service was held at 2 venues. The first part took place at the Bantu Men's Social Center in Elof Street, while the second was held at St. Cyprian Anglican Church in Anderson Street. Over 2,000 people attended, including leading figures in the black community. Dr. James Moroka, who was ANC president at the time, spoke at the funeral. Other speakers included Dr. A.B. Xuma, the former president of the ANC, Chief Albert Luthuli, president of the ANC in Natal at the time, and soon to be national president, Richard V. Silope Tema, a former general secretary of the ANC and one of its founders, Levi T. Mvabaza, a veteran leader of the ANC and a member of the 1919 SANC delegation to Great Britain, and Professor D.D.T. Jabavu, the first black professor at the University of Fort Hare, editor of the first black-owned newspaper, Imvo Zabansundu, and president of the All-African Convention. The legal profession was represented by Advocate L.R. Dyson. Leading traditional leaders attended or sent representatives to the funeral. Among them were chiefs from Hammanskraal and Daggakraal. Chief Alpheus Hlophe, who spoke at the funeral service, represented King Sobhuza II of Swaziland, while Zulu royal family was represented by Prince Mshieni Kadinuzulu, who also spoke on behalf of the CMA family. The apartheid government sent a spokesman for Dr. W. Eslon, the Secretary of the Native Affairs. The service was presided over by Father Wood of St. Cyprian's Anglican Church. The speakers lauded CMA for his role in bringing about the unity of black people. Dr. A.B. Xuma called him an architect of our people, adding that CMA gave black people the inspiration of being a nation, he himself having laid the foundation of our freedom. The speakers mentioned CMA's many achievements, including the fact that in January 1912, at age 30, he had founded the South African Native National Congress, which was renamed the African National Congress in 1923. He was the first Treasurer General in 1912 and its fifth president from 1930 to 1937. He also served as the secretary for the chiefs in the ANC executive of President General Xuma. He was the second African to be admitted as a practicing lawyer after Alfred Mangena. Through his successful legal practice, he became the first black person to argue a case in the British Privy Council. He was also a trusted advisor to various traditional leaders and the Swazi and Zulu royal families in particular. He founded two newspapers, Abantu Batu, the first national black newspaper, carrying reports in English as well as African languages, and Ikwezi le-Afrika, which was established in 1928 and which was later incorporated in a newspaper called African Leader. He also founded numerous organizations, including the Native Farmers Association of South Africa, later named the Native Farmers Association of Africa, which brought land from white farmers to black settlement, and the Native Landowners Association of Africa. What the speakers chose not to mention about CMA's life was equally significant, if not more so. Their contribution omitted the fact that by the time CMA died, he had become a discredited public figure with a record of scandal and controversy. His presidency of the ANC from 1930 to 1937 had caused untold damage to his reputation and public standing. His leadership style was often described as authoritarian, undemocratic, and arrogant. So widespread was the perception that he was intolerant of views differing from his own that the leading black newspaper at the time, the Bantu World, called CMA the Tula Sizwe of the black race. He who is never opposed and does not tolerate views other than his own. By the time Sieme was voted out of office in December 1937, the ANC had almost collapsed and his reputation lay in tatters. Though a pioneering lawyer with a reputation of successful litigation on behalf of black people, Sieme was on more than one occasion found to have breached the law and protocols of his profession. One particular case involved the small community of Waverley Township outside Pretoria, which faced eviction from a property he had occupied for decades. The community approached Sieme, and though he agreed to represent it, he was accused of overcharging and leaving his clients in the lurch, which led to him being struck off the roll. The Waverley Township incident eroded Sieme's reputation and resulted in the accusation that he was quick to take advantage of the desperation of vulnerable black people. It did not help matters that this was not the first time he appeared to have done exactly that. Alongside his reputation for being a political visionary, grew a strong perception that he was an unscrupulous leader whose penchant for the finer things in life led him to exploit his people. It is no wonder that by the time Sieme died in 1951, he was an isolated political figure who was spoken about in the past tense, if at all. Perhaps nothing better captures his fall from grace than the epitaph on his modest tombstone, the most notable feature of which is the simple inscription in loving memory of Dr. P. Ka Sieme, B.A.L.L.B. Underneath this are the words, "The stone has been erected by his family and inkatha yenkululeko yesizwe." And below that, founder of African National Congress in 1912. Although politics is full of surprises, it is nevertheless astounding that the tombstone of the founder of the African National Congress was erected by Inkatha Yenkululeko Yesizwe, a rival political organization whose vision many would consider antithetical to that embraced by Sieme throughout his adult life. And yet, this seeming contradiction encapsulates the fundamental nature of Sieme's life with all its complexity and ambiguity. These characteristics have made Sieme a somewhat strange historical figure, a person whose imprint in the South African political stage, though significant, has received minimal recognition. Even basic information about his life remained unknown or is inaccurate. For instance, there are claims that his mother's name was Sarah Mseleku and that Sieme completed a law degree. Even though both assertions are incorrect, they have often been repeated. Similarly, his brothers, especially Isaac Marsh and Mbekwana Isaac Sieme, have been mistaken for his father. It has also been erroneously claimed that his first wife, Frances Iniwe, who is often referred to simply as the Xhosa woman, passed away while married to Sieme, while she in fact died after their divorce. Other claims have not been adequately interrogated. Richard V. Silobe Tema, for instance, has suggested that Sieme's Christian upbringing in the missionary community of Inanda as a Zulu had an influence in his life. Jordan Ngubane claimed that Sieme was not in fact Zulu, but rather a Tonga man, while Sieme himself occasionally claimed to be related to the Zulu royal family or to be a blood relative of Reverend John Langa Libalele Dube. There is also confusion about Sieme's educational history. While there is a general assumption that he received a law degree at the University of Oxford, where he was a student in the early 1900s, this is in fact incorrect. His nephew, King Edward Masinga, believed that Sieme had many more academic degrees than the only one he actually gained. At various points, Sieme himself made false claims to having a master's degree as well as a doctoral degree in law. The gaps and confusion reflect, in part, the paucity of information about Sieme's life, yet this has not deterred attempts to write about him. Mos Mashimaite has written a biography, but it leaves substantial areas of Sieme's life untouched. And the brief sketch written by Richard Rive and Tim Cousins focuses on Sieme's years as a student at the Mount Hermon School for Boys in northwestern Massachusetts. Chris Saunders has addressed aspects of Sieme's life, the most comprehensive of which is an article drawing largely on Sieme's correspondence with Elion Leroy Locke, a fellow student at Oxford University. An article by Rob Moore examines Sieme's farm purchases in the former Eastern Transvaal, in particular one in Middelburg. Peter Limb has edited an impressive volume that focuses on Abantu Batu, the newspaper that Sieme started in 1912. In addition, there are two master's dissertations, the first by Marvin Fison in 1983, focuses on Sieme's presidency of the ANC. The second, by Michael Ndlovu in 2014, examines Sieme's political ideology. The time has come for a more comprehensive account of a man who lived an unusual and interesting life long before the formation of the ANC, and an even more storied and controversial life afterwards. Sieme is described either as the founder of the ANC or as the moving spirit behind its formation. For while others were involved in establishing the organization, it was Pixley Sieme who led the initiative and gave the inaugural address at the founding conference on the 8th January 1912. 4 decades later, Richard V. Silope Thema, a conference delegate, wrote about Sieme's remarkable achievement in bringing together tribes that had never met together before except on the battlefields. Thema went on to say that the founding conference was a gathering of educated Africans who had never exchanged views before. It was a gathering, if I may say so, of departed spirits of the African race, among whom were such men as Sandile, Tsaka, Mushweshwe, Echwayo, Moroka, Kama, Sikukune, Soshangane, and Ramopulane. Sieme's involvement extended to his relationship with the Zulu and Swazi royal families, including his marriages to a Zulu and a Swazi princess. But Siema's relationship with the two royal families went beyond the personal. For many years, he was King Sobhuza II's lawyer, confident and representative on matters affecting the Swazi nation. Siema was also intimately involved in the affairs of the Zulu royal family house, beginning with the reign of King Dinuzulu kaCetshwayo right until his death when Cyprian Solomon became king. There is a strong indication that Siema played a decisive role in ensuring that Prince Solomon was chosen over Prince David, another claimant to the throne. In Siema's final years, the ANC Youth League adopted African nationalism as its guiding philosophy. Indeed, it laid at the heart of the ANC's 1949 Programme of Action. A key figure behind the reassertion of African nationalism in the ANC was a young lawyer by the name of Anton Muzwakhe Lembede, who happened to have served his articles under the tutelage of Siema at his legal firm in Johannesburg. It is possible that Siema taught Lembede not just law but also politics. It is easy to imagine the two men debating politics, although it has to be noted that Lembede's brand of African nationalism was decidedly more radical than Siema's. The important point is that African nationalism and its Pan-African variant has been a golden thread throughout the ANC's century of existence. It is a crucial aspect of Siema's political legacy. 6 decades after his death, Pixley Siema and his contribution to South Africa are finally receiving recognition. In 2006, the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa awarded Siema the Order of Luthuli in gold, Tribution in gold. This order is awarded to South Africans who have made a significant contribution to the struggle for peace, justice, democracy, and human rights. In awarding the order to Siema, the presidency stated that his life is an outstanding example of a search of academic excellence running parallel with a commitment to a struggle for justice. The government of Mpumalanga has erected a statue in his honor in the town of Volksrust, where Siema and his associates had bought a farm through the Native Farmers Association. The government of KwaZulu-Natal has likewise erected a statue at the homestead where Siema was born. Street names, a municipality, and a building have also been named after him. These are fitting tributes to a distinguished South African. But official honors and recognition tend to tell only half the story. They simplify a complex life into statues and monuments before which we are expected to pay our respects. There is obviously a place for hero worship in every society, but the role of a biography is different. It should examine the life of its subject in a multifaceted and complex manner. That is how life is, after all, multifaceted, complex, and ambiguous. The life of Pixley Siema was certainly no exception. When mourners drove to Nuclear Cemetery to bury Pixley Siema, they were not joined by the executive committee of the organization Siema had founded. Instead, members of the committee attended a meeting with the Transvaal Indian Congress, the purpose of which was to plan for what became known as the Defiance Campaign of 1952. Present at the meeting were Dr. J.S. Moroka, the president of the ANC at the time, Dr. Yusuf Dadu, who did, however, manage to attend Siema's funeral, Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and several other leaders of the ANC. Given Siema's preference for non-confrontational forms of protest, or hamba kahle politics, as the ANC Youth League derisively called it at the time, it is ironic that the turn to confrontational mass mobilization against the apartheid state was planned while his funeral was taking place. That turn to the masses fundamentally transformed the character and trajectory of the ANC and brought to the fore new leaders such as Albert Luthuli, Oliver Tambo, Nelson Mandela, and Walter Sisulu. If one were to ask any young South African today to name a few ANC leaders, they would probably mention Luthuli, Mandela, Tambo, Sisulu, and their contemporaries. But most likely not Pixley Siema, and as may be expected considering that Siema led the ANC during the first half of the 20th century. Nonetheless, Siema's diminished status in the public consciousness should not detract from the contribution he made to South Africa or discourage scrutiny of his life. In the 1930s, Dr. A.B. Xuma, the sixth President General of the ANC, wrote a biographical pamphlet about Charlotte Maxeke titled Charlotte Manye Maxeke, or What an Educated African Girl Could Do, to which W.E.B. Du Bois wrote a foreword. In his introduction, Xuma issued the following caveat. Biographers in whose society and group, thank God, I do not belong, are usually great enthusiasts about their subjects. Being artists, they often create hero and heroine rather than relate true history and activity. They polish and gloss over the rough edges. They are sometimes so successful in their art, creating a picture or image which, though perfect, is so unlike the subject that he almost fails of recognition by those who knew him in life, and if living, himself is urged to ask, whose life is this? Is this my story? Like many biographers, I began as an enthusiast about my subject, but I have tried as far as possible to write frankly about Siema's life and the context that shaped it. The complexity and ambiguity of Siema's life and legacy have served as a check against polishing or glossing over his rough edges. At the same time, I have tried not to fall into another temptation, which is to emphasize his failures at the expense of his many achievements. The balancing act this entails may frustrate the reader who prefers a universe of saints and villains. Sieme, like most human beings, was neither. He could be upliftingly brilliant, but also depressingly disappointing. I have sought to capture his highs and lows, and to do so honestly. Whether I have successfully avoided the biographer's pitfalls that Xuma so eloquently identified is for the reader to judge.